Have you ever had one of your photos come out looking dull? There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that this picture was taken in matrix or evaluative meter mode. While it works fine for most images, others not so much. This happens because the matrix metering mode is evaluating almost all of the scene, making sure that everything is within exposure parameters. But since the scene is almost all white, it's lowering that a bit along with the rest of the image. Now you could use one of the other metering modes for this scene. Center weighted, for instance, gives about a 70% priority to the center of the frame when calculating exposure. But as you see, we've still got an awful lot of white surrounding our little sapling here, and I still think that it's going to tone down the whites. Spot metering really is the way to go here. It uses an area not much larger than the focus points on your camera. The question would be, where do you put the spot? What part of the frame do you actually meter? And before we get to that, we need to take a look at how the camera actually meters for white. To demonstrate this, I set my Nikon up on a tripod, focused on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of matte, bright white paper, the color of snow, and set the camera into programmed auto, and I took 8 pictures. The first one is with matrix metering, no exposure compensation. The second one is with center weighted metering, no exposure compensation. And the third one is spot metering, no exposure compensation. They're all gray. And this is what the camera does. 18% gray, in fact. It might be a little different on some cameras, but it's going to be pretty close to that. So with the spot metering set as my metering method going forward, I introduced some exposure compensation. This is one stop. And as you can see, the histogram has moved significantly toward the right. But we still don't have any whites in this picture. So let's go up another stop. This is 2 stops of exposure compensation. And as you can see, the histogram's moved either further right, but we still don't have any whites on this paper. 2 1/3 stop. We're getting close. Look at the histogram. 2.7 stops. We're almost there. And finally, 3 stops. And as you can see, we now have white. In fact, if you look at the histogram, you might even see we might be blowing these out just a little bit. So between 2.7 and 3 stops, we have what was under the spot meter now being exposed as white. So for my camera, using 2.7 stops of exposure compensation and spot metering on the brightest part of the snow, locking exposure with the AEL button and recomposing if necessary will give me the best sensor saturation with white snow and as much detail in the shadows as possible. Of course, if you're looking to blow out the white background, you might try an additional stop or 2 exposure compensation, and you'll wind up with something like this. Now, it's always possible your camera's going to be a little different than this, but it's an easy thing to check. Just take those spot metered photos in either programmed auto or aperture priority or shutter priority, just some kind of automatic exposure, and dial up the exposure compensation until you're getting whites just before you start blowing out highlights. Regardless of the camera, I think that you'll find that 2.5 to 3 stops is pretty much the norm. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please like it and subscribe.